Reyes Memorial Hospital was always busy after midnight, but most nights followed a pattern. There were car accidents, broken bones, fevers, and the usual tired faces of people who worked too hard and slept too little. The night staff had learned to expect a certain kind of chaos, the kind that could be handled with calm hands and quick thinking. But nothing about this particular night followed the pattern at all. It started with the sound of sirens, more sirens than usual, cutting through the quiet streets outside the emergency room. The doors burst open just after 2 in the morning, and 6 men were rushed in on stretchers, their clothes torn, their bodies covered in bandages that had clearly been applied in a hurry. They did not look like ordinary patients. Their training showed even in pain. They spoke to each other in short, clipped words, the kind of language used by people who had spent years working together in difficult places. Dr. Patel, who was running the front desk that night, called out instructions as the men were wheeled in. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, checking pulses, calling for equipment, and trying to make sense of the situation. The hospital had protocols for almost everything, but tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something important was happening, even before anyone understood exactly what that something was. Among the nurses working that night was a woman named Elena Vasquez. She had been a nurse at Reyes Memorial for 4 years, and most people who worked with her knew her as quiet, steady, and reliable. She rarely spoke about her life outside the hospital. She came to work, did her job with quiet skill, and went home. Nobody asked too many questions, and she never offered more information than necessary. That was simply how she was. On this night, however, something changed. As the 6 injured men were brought into different areas of the emergency room, Elena moved toward one of the beds without being told to. She did not wait for instructions. Her hands worked quickly and confidently, applying pressure in places that mattered, checking for signs that the newer staff might have missed. She used a particular kind of knot to secure a bandage, one that none of the other nurses recognized. When she called out information about blood type and condition, she used short, clear phrases that sounded almost military in their precision. A young EMT named Danny had just started working at the hospital a few weeks earlier. He was confident, sometimes too confident, and eager to prove himself. He had completed his training in emergency medicine and felt sure of his own abilities. When Elena told him to adjust the position of one of the injured men in a very specific way, Danny hesitated. He had learned a different method during his training, and he was not used to taking instructions from a nurse he barely knew. "I think I know what I'm doing," he said, perhaps a little too loudly. "I have field training. You're just a nurse." Elena did not respond right away. She did not look angry, and she did not look hurt. She simply repeated her instruction, calm and steady, and continued working on the patient in front of her. There was something about the way she moved that made Danny pause. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes stayed focused. She worked the way someone works when they have done something many times before, in conditions far more difficult than a hospital emergency room. 20 minutes passed in this way, the entire team working as quickly as they could to stabilize the 6 men. Slowly, one by one, the patients began to respond to treatment. Their vital signs steadied. The immediate danger started to pass. It was in this quieter moment that something remarkable happened. The man who appeared to be in charge of the group, even though he was lying on a hospital bed with his arm in a sling, slowly pushed himself up. He winced from the effort, but he did not lie back down. Instead, he looked across the room at Elena, who was checking on another patient nearby. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as if trying to confirm that what he was seeing was real. Then, despite the pain it clearly caused him, he raised his uninjured arm and gave a formal salute. The room went quiet. Doctors and nurses who had been moving quickly just moments before slowed down, unsure of what they were witnessing. One by one, the other 5 men began to notice what their commanding officer was doing. Even injured, even exhausted, they followed his lead. Bandaged hands rose. An IV line swung gently as one man lifted his arm. Despite their pain, despite everything they had been through that night, all 6 men offered the same gesture of respect toward the woman in pink scrubs standing quietly near Bay 4. Nobody in the emergency room moved. Danny, who had spoken so confidently just minutes earlier, stood completely still, his mouth slightly open, unsure of what to say. The commanding officer finally spoke, his voice rough, but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. He explained, slowly and carefully, that the woman they all knew as a hospital nurse was once a combat medic who had served 2 difficult tours overseas. He described how she had once kept 3 of his men alive during a dangerous mission, working under extreme pressure with almost no equipment, waiting for help that took far longer to arrive than anyone had hoped. He spoke of her training, her courage, and her unmatched skill under pressure. He said that he and his men trusted her with their lives, and that trust had never once been misplaced. Elena, who had remained mostly silent through all of this, finally looked up from the patient she was treating. She seemed surprised that her past had been revealed so suddenly, in front of so many people. It was clear from her expression that she had never planned to share this part of her life with her co-workers. She had built a quiet, private life at Reyes Memorial, and she had never expected her old world and her new one to meet in such a public way. For a moment, the entire emergency room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Elena did not make a speech. She did not explain herself or offer any long story about her past. Instead, she gave a small, respectful nod toward the men who had saluted her, the kind of nod that said more than words could. Then she turned her attention back to the patient she had been treating, gently checking the line of his IV, because in her mind, the task in front of her mattered more than the attention now focused on her. "At ease," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking only to herself. Danny, still standing nearby, did not say another word that night. Whatever doubts he had carried into his shift seemed to disappear in that single moment. From then on, whenever Elena gave an instruction, he followed it without question, handing her whatever instrument or equipment she needed, watching closely to learn from someone he now understood to be far more experienced than he had assumed. As the night went on, the emergency room slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The 6 men were moved to recovery rooms, their conditions stable, their lives no longer in danger. The immediate crisis had passed, but something in the atmosphere of the hospital had shifted. Nurses who had worked beside Elena for years now looked at her with new curiosity and respect. Doctors who had given her instructions in the past now wondered what other experiences she carried quietly within her. By the time the morning shift began, word of what had happened had already begun to spread through the hospital hallways. Nurses spoke to each other in hushed, excited voices. Doctors mentioned it during their morning meetings. Some details were repeated exactly as they happened. Other details became slightly exaggerated as the story passed from person to person, the way stories often do when they capture people's imagination. Yet at the center of every version of the story remained the same simple truth. A woman everyone had assumed was just a hospital nurse had once been so much more, and she had carried that history quietly, without ever asking for recognition. Elena finished her shift at 7 in the morning, just as she did every other day. She changed out of her scrubs, gathered her belongings, and walked out of the hospital into the early morning light. To her, the night had simply been another shift, another set of patients who needed help, another set of hands that needed steady guidance. She had not gone to work that night expecting to be recognized or celebrated. She had gone to work because that was what she did, night after night, regardless of who needed her help or what kind of training they had once known. As she walked toward her car, she thought briefly about the 6 men now resting safely in the hospital behind her. She hoped they would heal well. She hoped they would return to their families soon. She did not think much about the salute, or the attention it had brought her, or the way her co-workers now looked at her differently. To her, that moment had not been about her own past. It had been about doing her job, the same job she had done for years, first on dangerous missions far from home, and now in the quiet, steady world of a hospital emergency room. In the weeks that followed, life at Reyes Memorial slowly returned to normal, though a few things had changed. Elena remained the same calm, quiet nurse she had always been, but her co-workers now understood there was more to her than they had once realized. They no longer questioned her instructions, even when those instructions seemed unusual or unfamiliar. They had seen, in one unforgettable night, exactly why her calm confidence mattered. Danny, in particular, changed the most. He stopped assuming that experience could be judged simply by job title or uniform. He began to ask Elena questions about her training, eager to learn from someone who had clearly seen far more than he had. Over time, the two of them developed an easy, respectful friendship, built not on assumptions, but on genuine understanding of each other's skills and experiences. The 6 men eventually recovered and returned to their duties, carrying with them a story they would likely tell for years to come, about a hospital nurse who turned out to be far more capable than anyone in that emergency room had first realized. For them, the story was not really about surprise or recognition. It was about gratitude, about a debt of safety that could never quite be repaid, and about the quiet respect that exists between people who have faced danger together, even if they meet again only briefly, years later, in an unexpected place. As for Elena, she continued working at Reyes Memorial, choosing each day to focus not on her past, but on the patients in front of her. She never spoke much about the night the 6 men saluted her, even when others brought it up. She preferred, as she always had, to let her actions speak louder than any explanation ever could. In the end, the story of that night became something the hospital staff would remember for a long time, not because of dramatic events or extraordinary danger, but because of what it revealed about a woman who had quietly chosen to serve others, first on distant missions, and then within the walls of a busy city hospital. It reminded everyone who heard it that true skill and courage often hide behind simple titles and quiet routines, waiting patiently until the right moment reveals their true depth. And so, life at Reyes Memorial continued, one shift after another, with Elena Vasquez once again simply known as a nurse, even though everyone now understood there was nothing simple about her at all.